sorry about that, the recording's just started, I think, and as a result of those needs is unable to protect themselves against the abuse of neglect or risk of it. So that's the individuals that we're actually looking at. If you look at the statutory guidance, which is really useful in these sorts of situations, it helps there in terms of defining really what safeguarding means. So safeguarding means protecting an adult's right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. It's about people and organisations working together to prevent and stop both the risks and experience of abuse or neglect, while at the same time making sure that the adult's well-being is promoted, including where appropriate, having regard to their views, wishes, feelings and beliefs in deciding on any action. This has to recognise that our adults sometimes have complex interpersonal relationships and may be ambivalent, unclear or unrealistic about their personal circumstances. And I think that end bit is particularly important and can make these situations very difficult to manage. So now looking at actually what is abuse or neglect, there's quite a lot of information that can help you identify that. And although it sounds like an easy question, what is abuse or neglect, and we all may have something in our own minds, it's really important for those practitioners on the ground to really understand what that could be. And I'll particularly refer you to some new nice guidelines about safeguarding adults in care homes, which was only recently published on the 26th of February this year. And it's actually a really good reference point. And although it does relate to safeguarding adults in care homes, I think it is also useful for people in their own homes. And it does list and give specific examples of what abuse or neglect looks like. It gives some key indicators of where you are to consider or suspect abuse, and the sorts of examples for consideration or if, say, a person is in someone else's clothes, wearing someone else's clothes, there's poor hygiene, there's repeated UTIs, no access to food. So that's consideration. And then there's the higher level of suspicion, where a person may be malnourished or not receiving prescribed medications. And then if it's that higher level of suspicion, then a person must act. So I'd really commend you to look at those new guidelines. Age UK also does have details of what to look for when you're thinking or have suspicion or considering if there's abuse or neglect. And of course, the Care Act statutory guidance is there as well, which is very useful for specifying types of abuse and neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse, and the different indicators within them. So that's a really key starting point, that people on the ground understand what they're actually looking for. The next element to look at is who needs to be involved when there is a suspicion or consideration of a safeguarding incident. And the first person really is the individual. And that's a key element of safeguarding, to ensure that the individual in this isn't forgotten, and that those discussions are had with the individual concerned, and we don't go straight into an investigation without actually considering what the individual actually wants. And it's that's the key part of safeguarding in terms of looking at the 6 principles. The first is empowerment, ensuring that that person is involved. So that's also established in the statutory guidance in section 14. And there should also be proportionality about the level of concern while taking into account that person's wishes. If you're making a judgment that the person involved shouldn't have that discussion, they shouldn't have consent to take further action, then you really need to make sure that that judgment is well thought through and documented. It's quite a good reference point. The BMA has an adult safeguarding toolkit, and what they say about that sort of issue is where a competent adult explicitly refuses any supporting intervention, then this is how you should consider to take it. That should normally be respected, but there are exceptions to this, where there's a criminal offence may have taken place, or there could be a significant risk of harm to a third party. So in those sorts of cases, then you need to start thinking about involving the police and the local authority. But the first rule should be that the adults should be involved and their views should be respected. So the next consideration then is who else needs to be involved. And obviously the local authority are the lead agency and should be that point of contact if there are further investigations and inquiries that need to be made. So the Care Act, as I said at the beginning, covers the sort of the legal stance in terms of safeguarding, and Section 1 of the Care Act sets out the local authority's duty to promote the individual's well-being, and that includes protection from abuse and neglect. So it's clearly there in the Care Act of the local authority's responsibility in terms of safeguarding. There's then the Section 42 to make duty to make inquiries, and there's also the local authority can request cooperation from partners and vice versa. And there's a duty to cooperate, but also ask the local authority for their assistance as a partner. And the partners are the police, CCGs and the local trusts, as I'm sure you're aware. So who else needs to be involved? The local authority are obviously established safeguarding partners. And the police are then someone else that you might need to think about in these urgent situations. So when can the police actually take action if they are called? If there's an immediate risk, then they can enter premises to arrest if there's a suspected offender, but only if there's enough evidence under PACE. So they do have that possibility of entering a property if there are issues that need to be dealt with immediately and in a person's home. They also will carry out safe and well checks, as I'm sure you're aware. But if access is denied, then they do need to have that evidence of criminal offence and reason to suspect. The other ways that the police can intervene and enter someone's home if there are concerns is using the Mental Health Act. Section 135, if they get a warrant, can allow the police to enter into a person's home if there is evidence that the person is believed to be suffering from a mental disorder, and they get a warrant. Section 136 does allow the police to enter without the warrant, but only if there is evidence that the person needs to be removed to a place of safety if they immediately need care and control. And with both those sections under the Mental Health Act, the police must consult and get assistance from the mental health practitioner and a doctor. So that's another agency that can assist in these sorts of situations. And then finally, the CCG. As I'm sure most of you are from different CCGs, what are your own responsibilities? Well, the primary responsibility in terms of safeguarding will be your usual contractual duties with organisations, but also as a result of making arrangements for personal health budgets. So if there are commissioning arrangements for people, you will be responsible for ensuring that those contracts have specific safeguards in terms of safeguarding within them. So that is your responsibility. And then on top of that, you've also got your Care Act responsibilities in terms of consulting and being consulted with by the local authority. The Mental Health Act Trust may also need to be involved, especially if there are issues in terms of the individual's mental health and well-being, and liaising with the police relating to those mental health acts, section 135 and section 136 obligations and possibilities of entering somebody's home. And then finally, GPs, the current care providers, social workers, those people that may just have more of an up-to-date knowledge about what is happening with that individual in their home. And the local authority may also ask those individuals to carry out their safeguarding inquiries if that's the action that the local authority has considered needed to be taken. So that's where the people, the organisations that may need to be involved, and now I'll hand over to Neil, who will take forward the different options that may be available to you.
Thanks, Katrina. Okay, so Katrina's now talked through who would be involved, and I suppose then the most pertinent question that we would get asked when we are contacted in a case like this is, right, what do I do? And it is fair to say that we probably see, I suppose, the most serious, the most pressing cases, which by definition are those which the CCG or others are seeking legal advice. But it is true to say that even of those cases, which are probably towards the most serious end of the spectrum, it is still comparatively uncommon to actually go all the way to go to court, and we will work through in the next couple of slides about when you should go to court and what the court can do if you get there. But I would say that a high percentage of cases that we get asked to advise on do not necessarily end up with a court application, and the number of reasons for that, mainly because, as we explain in a minute, the court has quite a narrow remit of what they can and can't do, but also there are other probably more appropriate ways to follow through, and we've identified a few of them in this slide here. So we would be asked on behalf of a CCG situation that's concerning at someone who's vulnerable in the community, and the CCG, for whatever reason, has significant concerns about that individual. The first thing always is to look at the safeguarding angle, and we have quite a few cases, Katrina and I and our colleagues, where we are involved in speaking to the local authority, liaising with them, sometimes attending safeguarding meetings, and giving a legal input to that. Sometimes there needs to be some pressure applied in terms of ensuring that the local authority is picking up its responsibility. That is not always the case. Many local authorities are extremely responsive and helpful, but sometimes there is a friction, and sometimes it's suggested that because, say, somebody is fully CHC funded, it's therefore the responsibility of the CCG to sort this issue out, and that's not the case. Safeguarding, the primary driver in these situations, should be the local authority, and obviously the CCG often has a role in supporting that. So many of those situations get resolved very sensibly with local authorities and involvement at a local level. Other routes can be an agreement with the family. So this might be a situation where there's perhaps a difficult family that are obstructing care. So you might have a situation, I had a case a couple of years ago where there was a patient at the centre of the case, profoundly brain damaged patient who had a very caring and compassionate family, but they had fallen out pretty seriously with the care providers who were being funded by the CCG, and it was a very difficult situation that went on for a long time. We managed to resolve that eventually by we did end up going to court, but nevertheless it was that the core of the agreement was this memorandum of understanding. It was a framework, if you like, of behaviours where the family and the providers all signed up to it. It was very detailed about what was and what was not acceptable behaviour. So that was another aspect. And then there's no doubt that some of the cases we're involved in are extremely serious, and there is potential abuse going on, there's actual abuse going on, and that's the time to involve the police. And again, my experience, particularly over the last few years, is the police have a number of very highly trained officers that are involved in these sort of cases, and their input can be really useful and very productive. So there are a number of options that you can look into. But sorry, Debbie, if you could pop onto the next slide, please. When to go to court. Okay, so this is really more of an art than a science, and when we become involved, we'll often have clients come to us saying, you know, we need to go to court, this is really urgent, sometimes even saying we've got to make an out of hours application. And part of our role is to step back from that and think, okay, if we went to court with this case today, is this something which the judge would be, you know, sort of saying, yeah, I'm glad you've come to court, this is a really important issue for the court to determine. And sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes it's no, and sometimes it's a little preemptive to go to court, and there are other things, as I've just talked through this slide, that should be followed through first. So these really are no more than, as I said here, red flags about kinds of things which, if these are going on, that you probably need to think about going to court, or at the very least picking up the phone to us and having a conversation. So lack of reassurance engagement with the family. You might have a very vulnerable person with significant needs. Complex care package may have significant medication or physical health needs, and you've had no engagement from the family will not let any carer come across the front door. And that has been exacerbated by COVID, of course, in the last year, and many people have, with understandable reasons, been very, very reluctant to allow professionals to engage in the family home. But as we hopefully step out of that world, you know, these sort of issues will come back again, and there may well be genuine concern that the family are not able to deliver the level of care that is required, and therefore that person is at risk of serious deterioration or even death. Other things include suspected abuse or neglect, which you just can't deal with any other way, and certainly be looking to go to court. Obstructive families, so often you end up going to court with a family that has gone through a series of agencies, and every package breaks down, and there, unfortunately, I'm sure every CCG does have those sort of experiences, and in that situation you may reach the end of the line. You may say, well, look, if this care package breaks down, which it is in danger of doing so, there is no one else left. You know, there are no other agencies in the area who will deliver this care. This person is probably heading for institutional care, and that is not appropriate. And then fundamentally, the last one, which I think probably captures all of those, it's the inability of care to deliver care. So if you are responsible as a CCG for commissioning care to somebody who clearly, obviously has a need, and you are not able to deliver that, and you have tried every which way you can to do that, but you cannot deliver it for whatever reason, that is something which ultimately you might need to go to court about. So next one, Debbie. So what can the court do? So I'm sorry to state the obvious, but the court only has jurisdiction if the person lacks capacity. Okay, so the number one question that Katrina or I would ask on being approached by a client to say we really think we should make an application to court is, does the person lack capacity? And we would need evidence of that. Sometimes getting that evidence can be tricky, and particularly if there's been a total lack of engagement. Sorry, Debbie, can you just go back to the previous slide? Sorry. Yeah, so that can be tricky sometimes. So often, for example, we rely on GP, will be a person that'd be good to have an engagement with the patient, or sometimes there may have been a recent assessment, but you certainly need some sort of evidence before the court that the person lacks capacity. There is a theoretical alternative route, which is called the inherent jurisdiction of the High Court, and that applies where somebody has capacity, but that capacity or that ability to choose is overridden by a coercive relationship. So it is often cases of domestic abuse, effectively. It is very unusual. It is very difficult to prove. And in all the years I've been doing this sort of work, I have never personally had to make an application in those circumstances. One really positive thing about the court process is the official solicitor will usually represent the person in interest, so that gives a voice to the patient, which, as Katrina said in her slides, it sometimes can be easy to forget, actually, that there's, that the most important person at the centre of all this should be that individual. And sometimes when you have very noisy, aggressive families, sometimes that can be overlooked. So that's really important function, that the official solicitor, the role of that body will be only interested in what's right for that individual, and that's their brief, and they, I have to say, do an excellent job in delivering on that. It is important to realise that you can't just go to the court and say, we've got a really difficult problem here, we have no idea what to do. Do you want to just make a decision, Judge? That will not go down well. You need to go to the court with options. Now, it may well be that you have only two options: either the person stays where they are or they move into residential care, for example, and your very, very strong view may be for 25 reasons that you think the person needs to go into residential care, but nevertheless you will be expected to at least consider that other option and spell it out, and you need to have evidence of that. So if you're saying, actually, this person must be moved out of the home environment because the behaviour of the family is intolerable, and it's for these reasons, you will need evidence of that. Okay, so whether that's in a statement, but certainly I think some written evidence as well, evidence of meetings, minutes, emails, documents, attempts to engage. A judge will not pull somebody out of their home lightly. Okay, so this is a serious decision, and one that has profound implications for both the individual and their families. So you are going to need some pretty serious evidence to do that. It may well be that you can say to the court, well, we're not even prepared to consider doing this. So there might be an option. Somebody could be in a care home, or they could move to another type of institutional care or supported living or whatever, or they could be at home, and you may well say, as the commissioning body, we are not even prepared to think about or to countenance them living at home because of X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z may be it's a prohibitively expensive care package that you would not approve for anybody else. It may be because there's a history of violence and aggression, which would make it inappropriate to send carers into that environment, whatever it may be. And you're entitled to say to the court, we're not even asking you to think about that because we're not prepared to do it. And the court does not then have the authority to overrule that. The court can't say, well, can you please change your mind and think about that again, or order you to do it. You can be challenged for that decision, ruling it out, but that would be through a judicial review, and that is quite difficult, but that is a different talk entirely. But that is another theoretical opportunity. But from a commissioning perspective, you are allowed to say, these are the options we're prepared to consider. We are not prepared to consider this. And provided the judge accepts you've given cogent evidence on that, then that would be something the court would not be able to order you to do as it were against your will. Sorry, Debbie, the next slide. So when to call us? Well, I suppose it's the lawyer's inevitable responses sooner rather than later. We do get a lot of queries from clients on this sort of area, and very often they will be along the lines of, this is really urgent, this is really serious, we must go to court, today, tomorrow, or whatever. And actually, when you dig into it, this is a situation that's been going on for weeks or months. And one of our roles is to stand back from that and think, okay, if we made for example, an urgent out of hours application, we got a judge out of bed in the middle of the night, you know, would we feel comfortable in saying, this is a situation which has come from nowhere, we are going to court because there is no choice, and we have to do it at 3 a.m. because there is no other time to do it. Now, the answer may well be yes, but 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And so the advice we would say to you is get us involved. Don't leave it until you're at the point where, if you can't sort out the problem today, you know, this person's going to be homeless, or this person's going to have to go into admitted to a psychiatric unit, or whatever the case may be. We have long experience of not just going to court, but also advising clients on all the stages that can lead up to that. So both of us have attended safeguarding meetings, have advised on those, giving advice behind the scenes, sometimes directly liaising, for example, with the legal services of a local authority, speaking to families, etc. And we will also be able to give you a view when to make a court application. But if we are notified and involved earlier, then we can give that advice without it becoming a really, really desperately urgent situation. And of course, one of the benefits that we have now really from arising from the conditions we've all been working in the last year is that it has made it, I think, probably easier to pull all the right people into the same room, the same virtual room, through Teams and through the technology we all have now. And that does mean that things like this become significantly easier to be able to get everyone, all the decision makers, all the people that know the situation in one place quite quickly. And so the real message, I suppose, is don't be afraid to pick up the phone to us and seek advice sooner rather than later. Right. That is it in terms of the presentational bit. I've got, I appreciate, only literally a couple of minutes left. If you want to put any questions through, please do so through the Q&A box rather than the chat box. I'll leave that for a minute or so. But while we wait for any questions, Katrina, did you want to have a quick word about the next session?
Sorry, I was just trying to find my unmute button. Yes, you will have seen just me bobbing up and down there, desperately trying to unmute myself. So the next session is on the 28th of April. And when we send these slides out, that's about commissioning disputes. And we will send details of that with the next slide so that you can, so it's resolving funding disputes. You can log into that, and it would be good to see you again for that session.
Thanks, Katrina. We've had no questions popped up immediately. You will, after this session, you will get an email with just a survey to respond to. I'd be really grateful if you could do that. You've got our details. Katrina says, well, send a follow-up with this recording and afterwards anyway. So if anybody does have any more questions, please do let us know. We do appreciate as well that this has been just over half an hour going through what is an enormously complicated and varied subject. And so if anybody would like any further training on this, whether it's in this format or for your individual organisation or individual teams that you work with, we are very open to that and very happy to do that, because we appreciate we're only really skimming the surface here. And there are, it is a difficult area to deal with, and one that's may well benefit from having sort of perhaps more tailored individual talks and going into a bit more detail. We're very happy to do that. If people would find that, just do drop us an email. We'd be very happy to accommodate that. Okay, I think we shall leave it there then. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. As I say, there will be a survey going through. Please do reply to that, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.